In this video, I'm going to show you how I went from a digital file and a skeleton like this to an incredible 3D print. My background is in 3D art, more specifically 3D art for physical production. So I thought I would take the time to create a video encompassing everything that I do when creating my tabletop miniatures. So how I go about my entire process, starting from idea and concept through Zbrush, starting with the default sphere, and then creating a high poly model, and then prepping it for 3D print. And hopefully the end result is a nice, clean, physical, polished model. So whenever I start a new project, I always have a look at what's already out there. So I look at already existing models from the likes of Warhammer and Steamforge and Warlord and all of the popular companies that we all know and love. And I try and analyze why I like them. So what makes a successful model? 95% of the time, it's story. These miniatures are able to communicate stories and atmospheres based on posing or the environmental storytelling that it's doing. Now for this project in particular, I remembered that I had one from early 2025 and I had this idea that I wanted to do of like a spider creature. Now I didn't get very far at all. In fact, I'll bring it up on screen. I think I spent literally half an hour on it or something, but I really wanted to do something with that. I know that there was a good idea there, so I felt like this was the project to sort of resurface that idea. So I had a look at some already existing ideas and concepts that are already out there. So I looked at Loth from D&D, and I looked at this big spider lady from Doctor Who. There were also some other characters that I looked at as well. Devourer was a good one from Mortal Kombat. So any of these bug-like features I tried to pull in and work in some way or another. And then once I've got a rough idea or a concept in my head, I try and flesh out some sort of story or ideas for posing. And the way that I like to do this is by writing down a few questions about the character and answering them. For example, who is the character? Where are they? What's the intent? And by answering these, we can come up with a pretty good idea for a model concept. So now that we've got a rough idea of what we're going to do and the environment that this character is going to be in, it's time to open my beloved. So early on, I always like to focus on the big, bulky shapes. So getting a clean silhouette and readability is really, really important in these early stages. As you move up through the process and the pipeline, you're going to increase geometry, and higher resolution is a lot harder to control. So higher geometry and increase in resolution is always going to be harder to control. So keeping it as low as possible and really focusing on negative space and leading lines early on is going to be the key to creating a great model. So I utilize Zbrush's armature. That way I can kind of get an idea and move around poses quickly and efficiently without locking on to any ideas, and I have that freedom to iterate. So there are a few limitations that come with creating for physical production. And these limitations you have to bear in mind throughout the entire process in order to create a clean model. So things that we need to bear in mind are scale, model thickness, and weight distribution. These three things are going to be key in creating something that will work in the physical space. Let's break down really quickly why each is important. So scale, I know that I wanted this to be sort of palm-sized. So I know that I don't have to go in and add pores and leather texture if I wanted to. I don't have to do any of that high-frequency detailing because at that scale, it's not going to read. It's not even going to print that level of detail. Model thickness, so thin parts like hair or any kind of bandaging or anything like that, you always want to thicken and emphasize to make sure that when it comes to printing, there isn't going to be any thin parts that would snap or break easily. From here, it's just a matter of iterating, so stepping up and bringing everything up together, opposed to hyper fixating on finishing one part or one rock, or I just need to finish the hand. Working evenly throughout the model is the best method in this case. Obviously, also getting regular feedback, so outside perspective is always really, really important. Taking a look around the back as well, you've got all of the eggs in the egg sack with a pile at the bottom as well, so the idea of over time she's laid these eggs and they've fallen out and they're left there, and I tried to incorporate one hatching as well. And overall I was pretty happy with it, and I thought I was finished. Plot twist, I wasn't. Remember at the start of the video when I said the 2 things that you need for a good model is storytelling through the environment and storytelling through the pose? Well, I'd only done one of these. The environment tells the story, but the pose doesn't do as much as I thought it did. The model was way too symmetrical. I knew that I had to break that symmetry to create something more dynamic that would communicate a feeling. So after having a incredibly intense 1v1 with the gizmo tool and positioning it in the right place to get the right rotations and stuff, I wanted to lower the arm and raise one so that it had a clear leading line. I was finally finished, and it took some time, but the high poly was done, and I was left with this. So now that the high poly is done, the only thing that we've got left to do is to split it down and prep it for 3D print. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the high poly and we're going to merge all of the subtools into their separate pieces. So we're going to try and get down the torso into one piece, the base into a piece, the egg sac into a piece, and the legs into a piece. So we're going to utilize Dynamesh, and we're also going to utilize polygroups as well, just to keep the files a little cleaner. So one thing that I always have is a FBX file of a traditional key. So this is just clean topology, easily scalable, and we'll just use that as the positive to then use Boolean cuts to make sure that the pieces fit together nicely. So as you can see, I've merged all of these subtools down into the pieces that we spoke about. I've also Dynameshed them together, and a little tip for you, this little circle on screen here next to the number on the Dynamesh, if you check this little circle, it will take into account the scale of the model. After I've done this, I'll do some real big permanent changes. This is where we start using Boolean cuts, so make sure that you've got a version saved. So here's where you have to kind of think about it a little bit. So I've tried to hide the keys and the cuts and stuff like that, so that when it does come to print and we do print it out, the seams aren't as visible, or there's naturally going to be some cleanup, but you want them as hidden as you can, if that makes sense. So let's take these 2 pieces, for example. You've got the eggshell, and then you've got the egg sac. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use these 2 pieces to make a negative of each other. So I'm using one piece, the egg sac, to take away and intersect with the shell, so that way there's no overlapping and it's a clean cut. Now that that's done, all I've got left to do is add the keys, scale them up. After I've done this, I like to scale down the key ever so slightly. What this means is when it does come to print, the scale of the key is smaller than the cut itself, so that when it fits together, it's a nice smooth cut, and I know that key's going to fit, opposed to if I left it at the same scale. That's where you'll start to see sort of a little bit of a seam line there. So that's why I always scale it down a little bit. Once all the keys are in place and I've done all my Boolean cuts, I will Dynamesh one more time to make the key a part of the model as well. And that's pretty much it for the prepping of separating the pieces and the keys and that kind of stuff. After that, I go into the 3D print hub in Zbrush, and I will use this setting here. So this is Decimation Master. So because we've dynameshed everything, and this is still technically a high poly, the polygons are going to be way too high. We can see this if I turn on the frame here and see the poly groups. There's a lot of detail here, and there's a lot of polygons. So we want to get that down as much as we can. So what Decimation Master does is it takes all of the surface detail and all of the data of the polygons, and it will crunch it down as much as you can, whilst preserving the shape and the detail of the model. So for example here, we're at ridiculously high polygons, but then on the same piece, once decimated, you're sitting at about 10k, which is a lot easier to manage. So I do that for each part, and then we are ready to export. So with those pieces exported, I can then load them up into, I prefer Chitterbox. I know people are a lot bigger on Lychee now, but it's just the one that I'm used to, but use whichever software you like. So loading the STL files into Chitterbox. Generally speaking, I use the auto support feature. This will just basically get a rough estimation of where the supports are going to go. Things to bear in mind are the rotation of the pieces, so where those supports are going to go. For example, if we take the basing, those supports you're going to want on the bottom, on the underneath, so that it doesn't damage or have any support lines on the top. It's just going to be a lot easier to clean up, a lot easier to sand. So just be aware of which way you're printing and which way the part is facing. So generally speaking, auto supports these days are pretty good, but I generally have to do a little bit of tidying up before exporting the final supported format. So do that for each piece, and you should be good to go. So I don't actually 3D print myself anymore. I outsource for all of the 3D printing. So I reached out to the people that I use for 3D printing and sent over my files, and a couple days later it was here. So I've just assembled all the parts that I've just got back from my supplier, and this is the final result if I can get it to focus. The level of detail that I managed to capture on the model is incredible. I mean, even around the back, like on the exact round here, we managed to capture so much of that detail there. And if I can get it to focus, there we go. And yeah, it looks incredible. I've put down a layer of primer as well, just to get the colouring a little bit more even, and obviously it's split down into the 5 pieces that we did earlier on. But I mean, it looks so much better than I thought it would, and I'm really happy with the results that we managed to get there. Even on like the skulls at the bottom, I don't know if I can get it to pick that up. I've done my best there, but it looks phenomenal. I'm really happy with it. So yeah, that is it from me. If you do want to support me in what I'm doing here, then make sure that you do follow me on my various social medias. Links will all be in the description, as well as if you want to get a copy of this model as well. It would mean the absolute world to me. Everything you'll need in the link, yada. I'll see you very soon.